Between the husband and the wife, chapter 3, verses 1 through 7. Paul will talk about these, Ephesians chapter 5 and various other places. Peter here in verses 1 through 7. Remember, he gets to this is the applicable, this is the practical part of his book. He doesn't quite spend as much time on doctrine as does Paul. He makes that transition in chapter 2, verse 10 and 11. We start talking about things we need to do. And this is the last section of that, duties to all. Verse 8, Peter will talk about our duties, my duty to you, your duty to me, our duty to the elders, and so forth, our duties to each other. He's also going to give us the proper motivation. He's going to give us motivation in verses 10 through 12. He's going to do that by quoting from Psalms 34. In verse 8 it begins, "Finally, be ye all of one mind, having compassion one of another. Love as brethren, be pitiful, be courteous." Brethren, you know, words mean things. And sometimes if we'll just stop and slow down and really look at the text, we can get so much from it. I know I have a habit, just like everybody else. I'm doing my daily Bible reading, man. I've got 15 minutes, you know, I plow through it. That's not really the way that we want to do our Bible reading. We need to be a little bit more, and I've tried to do that. And let me encourage you to do that. Slow down. Smell the roses, taste all the different things that each passage has to offer. And something else, brethren, these are individual things. We're going to look at 6 duties that Peter gives us here in just a short amount of verbiage that really take a lifetime to develop. If we're not careful, we can start looking at each other. We can start looking at people in the world as nothing more really than bugs. You know, they're in our way. You know, you're on your way to Chattanooga. This guy cuts you off. It's crowded. You're like, I wish these people would get out of my way. We can get desensitized to each other's humanity. We can get to the point where we just don't look at people as being individuals and people and being courteous in things because they're just the mob. They're the masses. And if we're not careful, this can carry over into things like the church. And we need to be careful and back up and look at texts like this and see these responsibilities and how that I can grow and develop each one. Verse 9, "Not rendering evil for evil or railing for railing, but contrariwise, or on the contrary, blessing, knowing that ye are thereunto called, that ye should inherit a blessing. For he that will love life and see good days, let him refrain his tongue from evil, and his lips that they speak no guile. Let him eschew evil or stay away from it, and do good. Let him seek peace and ensue it," or we might say pursue it. "For the eyes of the Lord are over the righteous, and his ears are open unto their prayers. But the face of the Lord is against them that do evil." All of one mind. I want to look at these 6 things that Peter says here in verses 8 and 9 and break each one of them down. He's going to look at 6 things. First of all, that we be all of one mind, that we would have compassion for one another, that we would love each other as brethren, that we would be pitiful. Now, that's an interesting word. We'll spend a little bit of time with that. I know Freddie Clayton uses this word all the time, and he'll say, "This is pitiful," you know. But it's not really what's being, we use it in the sense of something's just very bad. You know, that's just a pathetic excuse, or pitiful, you know. We'll see that that's not really what the King James means here. Courteous, return blessing for evil. And boy, that's one of those that's really difficult. Notice verse 8. This word finally comes from the Greek word titos, where we get our word tautology. It's the end of something. Let's hear the end of it. Not that it's the end of the book, but it's the end of these various things that he's talked about. Duties, responsibility to the world, duties, responsibility to government, duties to servant, master type relationship, and so forth. This is the end of that section. "Finally, be ye all of one mind." Notice this idea of one mind. The American Standard Version has the idea or the word like-minded. The New American Standard Version has the word harmonious, and the NIV uses the word harmony. I think with those other 3, you can kind of get an idea of what's being spoken of here. One of the reasons I like taking the languages, I like studying language, is that I have several translations, probably just like you. And when I get to a particular verse and there's so many different ways that it's translated, I like to back up a little bit and say, well, why is there so much difference in this? In this particular verse, we're going to find in verse 8 that no less than 3 words that we find in this verse are nowhere else in the New Testament. And hence they're only used once, and so you have various lexicographers that are doing the best they can, and they have to go back and look at how the language was used in that time and so forth. And so they're taking a shot at it. And it's amazing, as well as they're doing that, they're looking back so many thousand years and trying to go through various things to see how that word was used, how consistent and how able they are to do that. It's really remarkable after so much time. This word is what is from the word homophrones. Homo means the same, usually translated in the King James, you see it all the time, as together. Somebody's together, homo. And the last part there, the phrenos, is from the midriff or diaphragm. That's what it means, the parts of the heart, literally. But it's usually translated as understanding because the Greeks, like we do, use various parts of the body to describe emotions. Like today, they would, the King James uses the word bowels a lot. But, you know, we know they're not talking about their spleen and things of that nature. It's talking about the seat of affections. And that's how this is used. Usually translated understanding. So you can see you put them together, the same understanding, that we think alike. This is the only time you'll find this word used in the New Testament. Hence, you'll see the different translations as various translators try to deal with that word, that this is the only place they have to look at it, besides maybe some classical writings. Only used here in the New Testament, it means to think the same thing, have the same understanding. And brethren, that we speak the same things, that we have the same mind. That's so important. And the only way that we do that is to spend time together. We learn together. We read the same book. We study from the same word. And we try to draw the same conclusions. You know, that's one of the things that we see out there today. So many people say they're reading the Bible, but they're drawing different conclusions. You got to let the Bible say what it says. And if it happens to fall in a route or in a path that I don't like, I have to accept that. And a lot of folks today just want to simply change that. You know, we think about some of the religions out there today. Some people like, for instance, Charles Taze Russell of Jehovah's Witness, he'd just tell you straight up. He didn't like the idea of an eternal hell. He just did not like that. So you know what he did? He wrote it right out. Said that ain't what it means. And he just changed it. Why? He didn't like it. Well, brethren, I'll just be honest with you. It doesn't make me jump for joy. I don't get real excited thinking about the devil's hell lasting for eternity. But I'll tell you one thing, I'm not going to take it out. I'm not going to say it doesn't happen. And some people do that. But this says us to be of one mind. And the way that we become of one mind is to have the same goals. Our goal, number one, should be heaven. Number two, should be able to get us and our families there together, shouldn't it be? To have those same goals, we're all striving to do the same thing. Sometimes we're going to, not really pursue after what I want so much if it's for the betterment of the congregation that we all get there. Think about how many different battles and things that could be solved in churches if folks would simply look at the big picture and what's more important and be striving to go there together. Not only are we to have the same mind, but to have compassion for one another. This is an interesting word. If you look at it, you can say, hey, he misspelled sympathy. Well, no, that's the Greek language. That's the word if you bring it over into and anglicize the letters. Sympathes, suffering or feeling the like with another. Kindred verbs are in Hebrews 4:15, to be touched with. It's translated to be touched with. In Hebrews 10:34, it's translated you have compassion. But once again, this is one of those places where this is the only place you're going to find that word. In Vincent's word studies, he says this is an interchange of fellow feelings in joy and sorrows. He says our popular usage errs in limiting sympathy to sorrow. So what is he saying about how this word was used in that time? It meant joy as well as sadness. Rejoice with them that are joy, rejoice and weep with those that weep. That's the idea. If you've got a brother that's doing well, be happy for him. If you got someone who's healthy, be happy for them. And, find encouragement from that. But if you have someone who's sad, then you sympathize with them. We sympathize with people. We have sorrow. We feel the same way they do. And hence we have this sympathies, if you will. Not only compassion for one another, but one of the ways that we do that is that when somebody's going through a tough time or someone's going through a difficult time in their life is that we spend a little time with them. I'm afraid sometimes, brethren, we're so busy that we just think, well, somebody else will handle that. You might be the best qualified for that. And you might really make somebody's day by simply a phone call, text message. Nowadays you got so many different things that you can do. But compassion for one another. This next word, love as brethren, is from that word Philadelphoi. Now this is a two. It's the only time in the New Testament you're going to find this word. Now I know the word Philadelphus and other places, but this ending on it's the only time it's used this way. And Peter's peculiar for that. One of the things that Peter does, that he just kind of makes some words that are real choppy and hard to read sometimes, hard to pronounce. We'll see one of those in a minute. But it's translated literally, or Vincent's word study says, loving as brethren. Loving as brethren. Well, how should that be? The example of what not to do is found with Joseph and his brethren. Do you remember their father was treating Joseph differently? So what did they do? They didn't take it out on the father. They took it out on the brother. And they were going to take his life. They were going to kill him. And finally, the oldest, Reuben, talked them out of it and was going to go back and release him later, but they had already sold him to the Arab caravan that was going by. And of course, we know that God's hand was in all of that, but they wanted to kill that brother. Now, that's not the example we're to follow. But you know, Joseph and his brethren are an example of what to do as well. Joseph did the right thing. He could have recompensed evil for evil, as we're going to see here in just a little bit. He could have done something bad to them because he certainly was in power. All he had to have said was, kill them. And those Egyptians wouldn't have thought twice about it. They'd have just killed them, dumped the bodies out somewhere. I mean, that's the kind of authority he had. But he didn't. He had compassion on them. He loved them. And they thought that it might be just because his daddy was still alive. And you remember he brought his father down to Goshen. They lived in Egypt. And when his father passed away, immediately what did his brethren think? Well, he's going to kill us now. But what did Joseph do? It even broke Joseph's heart that they thought that he would do that. He said, you know, God has meant this. God had his hand in this. God has meant this for good. I don't have a grudge against you. And that's an example that we can follow. Not as the Esau and Jacob that, Esau was loved more by his father. There's another situation where parents, boy, I tell you what, if you ever needed an example of what not to do, don't play favoritism with your children. We see that happening with Joseph, and it turned his brothers against him. We see that happening with Esau, turned his brother against him. The dissension and the infighting, incredible. Not as Esau and Jacob, who, remember, Jacob grabbed Esau's heel. In fact, they were even wrestling within the womb. And God told the mother that there were two nations in her womb they were battling for, and that the older would actually end up serving the younger. You'll remember that Jacob grabbed his brother's foot as they were born. Esau was born a hairy man. Jacob's called the supplanter because he grabbed his heel. And so they had trouble all that time. But think of David and Jonathan. Now here were two brothers. They weren't brothers in the flesh, but the Bible says that their souls were knit together. They had a great love for one another. And even though Jonathan was in line to be the king, he understood that David was going to be the king. That was God's will. You know what Jonathan thought about that? He was happy with that. He said David needs to be king. David will be a great king. He was all for that. Of course, we know that his father wasn't, but that's the idea of brotherly love. I'm thinking that a lot of times brethren think they ought to follow the example of Joseph and his brothers in brotherly love and treat one another badly, but that's not what we're to do. We're to have long-suffering, patience with one another, love as brethren. You know, one of the things that you absolutely must have, and I'm reminded of this on a daily basis, as I'm sure you are, is that when you have family and you have folks living under the same roof that you do, you have to have patience. People will move. Well, let me tell you what they don't do. People will not put the toilet paper back when it's empty. That happens. I know it does. They think it just magically flies in there. I know that. Paper towels, you can forget it. They won't put them on the rack. That just doesn't happen. You got to have patience with a family. And the same thing happens in the church, brethren, except we don't know each other as well as we do our immediate family. So a lot of times we have to exercise even more patience because we don't really know what all is going on to make this person say this or do this or act this particular way. All we can do is be long-suffering and try to get to know that brother or that sister better and try to encourage them and try to be an encouragement and let whatever state in their life that we're confused with or we don't know why they act a particular way, maybe that's just how they are. You know, sometimes we get upset with folks because they don't act how we think they ought to act. And that's not right. And that's just not fair. We just need to be patient with one another and exercise that kind of patience and have love for brethren as the Bible would have us to do. And sometimes that means swallowing a little pride. Sometimes that means waiting outside while the bathroom's being used. Sometimes that means, going that extra mile and doing some things that we need to do. Love his brethren. Then nextly, this word pitiful. You look that up in the dictionary, the way we use it today, probably not at all like we find it here. It's one of those words you can look at it and you go, man, that's going to be a fun word to say. I remember when I was in high school, there was a course that was offered called Know Your Words. And I had a buddy in the drum line with me, and he'd always say, excruciating. And I just thought that was one of the greatest words, And so I'd go around, excruciating. And I said, well, I'm going to take that Know Your Words class. What I didn't know was you had to come up with 20 new words every week for 13 weeks and memorize them and be able to tell what they were. I got out of there with a C. I never want to look back at that. But that was a fun word, excruciating. But notice this word, explagnoi. Explagnoi. You got to admit, that's fun. You want to say it with me? Say it with me. Explagnoi. Yeah, and you might say, what is that? Well, it's talking about splock. It's talking about your bowels. I guess that's what happens when you cut them out and they just land in the floor. You get that splock sound. But it's splochnoi. Only here in the New Testament, again, where this word's used. This you here, it's a compound word. The first part means well or proper. And the splagnon is, Vincent's word study says, the nobler entrails, which are regarded as our seat of the affections, hence our popular use of the word heart. Do you realize the word bowels is only used one time in the New Testament, literally? And that's when it's talking about, Judas hung himself. Remember, he fell and his bowels gushed out. Every other time you read that word, it's used metaphorically. That's the only time it's used, and hence Vincent would say, bowels is really not a good word to use there. But that's what our King James translators used, and we understand it's the seat of affections, our heart, our mind. We use the word soul, heart, and mind sometimes today to have that same idea. Having strong bowels, compassionate, tender-hearted is this idea of pitiful, that we're pitiful with each other. We're tender-hearted. We have compassion for each other. We're not hypocritical. We're not judgmental. We're not we don't condemn folks. We don't get after them. That's the idea of pitiful there. And you'll find the King James, I believe, is the only translation that uses that word pitiful there. Courteous. Courteous here. Now, this is one of those things where you're going to find an alternate reading, okay? And don't get cranked up or upset about it. It's just the way it is when it comes to the New Testament. This is the word that's found in what's called the New King James. The newer translations would have use this particular text, okay? And this word simply means to be friendly or kind. In our King James Version, we find this philophrones in a friendly manner. They mean the exact same thing. And so it's one of those situations where you have thousands of texts that have this one word, and you have thousands of texts that have this other word. And so the King James, the Textus Receptus, went with the majority of the text. They gathered all those together, and they said it's philophrones. And the newer translation, Art and Gingrich, those guys, they went with the first word there. And so both of them have some similar ideas. A friendly manner. Be friendly with each other. It doesn't seem like that would, have to be a command, or that it would take a whole lot to figure that out. We're supposed to be brothers and sisters in Christ. We're supposed to have one mind. Our goal is to reach out and affect the world with Christianity, to show people what the life of Christ is like, what they can have as a result of the life of Christ, to preach and to teach, to have an influence on people for good. It almost goes that you wouldn't have to tell somebody, oh yeah, and by the way, smile every now and then. Be friendly. I know one brother that's Chad, and I can't remember his last name, Goodwin, I believe, Cliff Goodwin, there we go. One of his sayings is, brethren look like they've been weaned on a pickle, or sucking on lemons. We need to be a happier, joyful people, and the idea of being friendly, you got to be friendly. You got to be happy. And don't necessarily, you can't just make yourself be happy, but we can have a friendly countenance. We can be sociable with people. We can smile. A smile is one of those things you give, and you just about always get back. Of course, this philophrones, a compound word, to love, phrones being the midriff or the feelings again, that idea of bowels, and it simply means a friendly feeling. Be friendly to other people. You will not have an influence on people, the kind of influence that you should. You will not be able to influence their life for good, have an impact on their lives, help them to be the kind of people that they should be as Christians if you're not friendly with them. It's just not going to happen. Once again, here's one of those words. It's the only time you're going to find it in the New Testament. It's used by Peter here in verse 8. Not only that, we go to verse 9, and he says, not returning evil for evil, or what is the exact word? Not returning evil for evil, or railing for railing, I believe, or railing for railing. But, in other words, doing right, giving a blessing. Notice with me, not rendering evil for evil or railing for railing, but on the contrary, or contrary-wise, blessing. If somebody's giving you evil, give them a blessing. Somebody's railing on you, bless them. Somebody's blessing you, of course, bless them back. Most times we want to give what we get. You know, somebody gives us a hard time, we want to give them a hard time. Peter says, don't do that. Why? Knowing that ye are thereunto called. This is why you were called. This is why you're a Christian. Not so that you can treat people that are treating you bad. No, treat them good. And the reason you're going to do that, the motivation behind that ye should inherit a blessing. So you're not going to go not rewarded for that. It's not like, you know, that you're just going to go through life and that's going to be and nothing will ever happen as a result of that. No, that's exactly why you were called. As Christians, you're going to suffer. You're going to go through hard times, but you're going to be rewarded for that. And when people are giving you a hard time, as natural as it is to give them one back, Peter says, don't do that. Don't get caught up in that. You give a blessing, because this is why you're called. This is why you're a Christian. That's why you're the salt of the earth. You can make a difference. Handle it differently than the world handles it. Return blessing for blessing. This idea of return, apodidomai, apos, from, didomai, to give. To give from yourself a blessing. This word here is not the makarios. You know, blessed are they that die in the Lord, as we looked at this morning. This is a different word, eulogia. And where we get our word eulogize. It means a good thing, to speak well of. You know, give them a blessing. Not rendering evil evil, or railing for railing, but contrariwise, knowing that ye are thereunto called, that you should inherit a blessing, not evil for evil. And why should we do that? Well, he quotes from the Old Testament. He goes back to that Jewish hymnal, to, you know, Psalms 34, and he quotes that. He says, what man? Now, this is the Psalms version. If you look at Peter's quote here, it goes pretty well right with the Septuagint. You'll notice in our version, which is not the Greek version, it would have been from the Hebrew. It's a little bit differently, but no problem. It says, what man is he that desireth life and liveth many days, that he may see good? Keep thy tongue from evil and thy lips from speaking guile. Depart from evil and do good. Seek peace and pursue it. The eyes of the Lord are upon the righteous, and his ears are open unto their cry. The face of the Lord is against them that do evil, to cut off the remembrance of them from the earth. Exactly what Peter says. For he that will love life. Any of you love life? All of us love life. I mean, that's natural. Not that we want to live forever, but that we love life. It's good to wake up in the morning. It's good to feel good. It's good to eat a good meal. Those simple pleasures that we find in life. See good days. That's rhetorical, isn't it? Who wants to see bad days? He that would love life, see good days. How's that going to happen? Let him refrain his tongue from evil. Bad. Evil there is not just talking about satanic. It's talking about bad things. Gossip, slander, all those type of things. Cussing, things like that, brethren, bad words, of course. But that's not what he's talking about. Of course, that's part of it. But the evil there is just saying bad, to hurt brethren, hurt people. Let us refrain our tongue from evil, and his lips, that they speak no guile. One of the things you have to love about Nathaniel, Jesus says, an Israelite in whom is no guile, that our lips speak no guile, nothing wicked. Let him eschew evil, turn away from it, and do good. Let him seek peace and ensue it. Remember this morning we talked about how Peter was talking about chasing after peace. Chase after it like you would in a hunt. Seek peace and ensue it. Verse 12, for the eyes of the Lord are over the righteous. If we're doing what we're supposed to be doing, God is watching over us. His ears are open to our prayers. Remember what he said to the husbands in verse 7 of chapter 3. Likewise, ye husbands, dwell with them, the wives, according to knowledge, giving honor unto the wife as unto the weaker vessel, and being heirs together of the grace of life, that your prayers be not hindered. When we're not doing the things that we should be doing, our prayers are hindered. And right here, if we're doing what we're supposed to be doing, the Lord is over us. His eyes are over us. His ears are open to our prayers. But the face of the Lord, literally the face, the front, is against them that do evil. I mean, you know as well as I do, if the Lord's against you, you've had a bad day. It just ain't going to work out for you. Don't do evil. The Lord's against that. Conclusion. What makes the best, make the best of difficult, bad situations? That's the bottom line, really. How are you going to react when things go against you? How are you going to react when it's just a bad situation? You ever been in a bad situation? You ever been in a situation that's difficult? It's just not good. There's nothing good about this situation. All of us find ourselves in those. How are you going to react? What are you going to do? The only thing you can do the very best with what you have. That's one of the things as families. We understand our families go through things. We go through things. And that's what we're here for, to help each other and to go through those situations and make the absolute best case scenario that you can with what you've got to work with. You can't go back and reverse time. You can't go back and reverse things that have been done. Once they're done and there's the situation, you got to do the best you can with what you've got. And that's exactly what Peter's talking about here. This idea of being brethren and loving each other and having compassion and being pitiful and courteous and all these other things. Listen, do the best with what you got. You're going to find families that find themselves in situations that are awful. Look, that's what they've got to work with. That's what we've got to go forward with. Let's glue it back together as best we can and move on and make the best of it. But not only make the best of a difficult or bad situation, but make good situations even better. That's what brethren do. Even make good situations even better. In doing so, the Lord will be open to us and He will answer our prayers. And in doing so, we will enjoy life to its fullest. There's a proverbial expression in the next verse that kind of gives us a promise, a proverbial promise. It's one of those things, train up a child in the way that he should go, and when he's old, he will not forget it. He won't depart. It's proverbial. It doesn't always happen, but if you do things right, it usually follows this is the case. This is a proverbial expression. We find it in the next verse that says, "And who is he that will harm you if you be followers of that which is good?" Bottom line is, Peter says, most of the time, if you're minding your own business and you're doing what's right and you're trying to treat people even better than you'd have yourself be treated, if you're looking out for other folks, if you're being compassionate, you're being kind, who is it's going to give you a hard time? Who's going to... Granted, there'll be that person out there who will try to make life miserable for you. I know all of us seem to have one of those in our lives. But for the most part, most people, they're going to leave you alone. They're going to see, and they even appreciate you. They're even going to appreciate what you've done. We know we've lost some saints right here at South Pittsburgh since I've been here who've gone on to their reward. But I can tell you what, they left an impact. People appreciated. They might not be members of the Lord's church. They might not agreed with our brethren religiously, but they appreciated who they were. And I'll tell you one thing, they left them alone. That's exactly what Peter's saying here. Most people, if you'll do this is going to be a blessing even in this life, even for folks that are not Christians. There'll be times when you'll go through trials, but most people will simply leave you alone and they'll respect you. And that's what's here. Who is it that will harm you if you be followers of that which is good? Let me encourage you, friends. Not because it'll make your life a little bit easier or people have a tendency to leave you alone, but because your soul will be saved. If you're here tonight not a Christian, obey the gospel. It's that simple. If you don't know what all that entails, then come let me know. And we will spend as much time as that takes to make sure you don't leave this building without knowing what exactly you must do to be saved. In times past, maybe some of us have obeyed the gospel, but we've looked at what Peter's saying Christians ought to be doing and saying, phew, boy, I've got a lot to work on there. I haven't been doing that. Well, we can do that. But maybe if it's something that we feel like we need the prayers of the church, then by all means, make that request be known. If we can help you at all, would you come as together we stand and sing?
Oh, most precious